Okay, there she is, one of my favorite podcasters. I should say co-podcaster. I've never met Andrea. I really want to, but Sarah Kendzior, thank you for joining me. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
There's a billion things I want to talk with you about, and I've been listening, obviously, to Gaslit Nation, and I'm ready. I love that podcast. It is one of the few I cannot do without your podcast. But have you guys, maybe I missed it, have you talked about the monolith in the desert? Because I'm obsessed with it. And
no, not yet. Next week, I'm going to make Andrea talk about the monolith with me because it's now on its third disappearance today, or appearance in California. I was tweeting earlier, joking that it reminded me of Trump's money laundering operation in the White House, where everyone's like, wow, where did it go? Where did the monolith go? Where did the money go? And it's like, well, if you just had someone there watching it disappear, then you'll actually be able to catch that person and know what's going on, like some monolith oversight committee. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, it's obviously like this goofy thing. It's probably a art project or a prank or an alien invasion. Either way, something new to look at during the pandemic that's not as horrifying as everything else happening in the news.
I think it's obvious, based on everything that you've been covering, I've been talking about, that we've all been talking about, that the monolith is clearly part of the matrix that we're all in.
What's that would be a relief, honestly, but yeah.
Called when we're in a the thing that the matrix is. All of a sudden I can't think of,
like a network, like parallel universe.
Yeah, we're in a game. We're in a oh my god,
simulation.
We're in a simulation.
Yeah.
And the monolith is the control centers. They're the antennas for the simulation.
I hope they change the simulation point, because I've had enough. But no, it's like one of these weird things, like the evil clowns of 2016, the like celebrity rapture of 2016. Remember, all the celebrities were dying.
Oh yeah.
The Pentagon saying that UFOs were real, and everyone kind of shrugging because they were too tired to think about it. Like, there's been a lot of strange stuff.
The craziest thing that happened, that is most convincing, though, that we're in a simulation is, I hope you don't disagree, and if you do, I'll just end this interview and unsubscribe to Gaslit Nation, is the fly on Mike Pence's head and the hair dye on Rudy Giuliani's face. Those are clearly signs, right, that we're in the simulation, that someone's controlling this.
Those are just, I mean, I think those are both just cases where I was looking at two men and shuddering inside and looking away. I didn't even watch the hair dye incident. I mean, honestly, and I know this sounds too elaborate, but I think Giuliani, Roger Stone, et cetera, they try to look incompetent and idiotic and deranged while they're carrying out massive, serious crimes. And, Giuliani has a long history of this. Everyone is like, wow, how weird for Giuliani to not look dignified. I'm like, do you remember him like in drag with Donald Trump, like in 2000, doing whole videos? Like, guy's a freak. Like, he's done all kinds of weird things. And, Roger Stone loves to play these kind of characters. The Fly, I think, is just because Mike Pence is disgusting, and The Fly noticed that. But like, the Giuliani situation, I wish that people would take what he does much more seriously, because he has a very long criminal track record, one documented by Wayne Barrett back in the 90s when Giuliani was the mayor. And people too often just think he's like this clueless stooge when he's a hardened criminal. I mean, he's also nuts. Like, they're not mutually exclusive categories. But I hope people, I consider him a traitor to the country and a serious threat. So I wish people would look at him more like that.
Wow, now I'm glad I mentioned his hair dye for you to go off on that rant, because, yeah, I mean, they're both, Stone and Giuliani are super eccentric.
Purposefully. They're showmen.
But you say purposefully.
They're good at it. Oh, yeah. I mean, they know it. It's a trick. Roger Stone in particular was a protege, much like Trump, of Roy Cohn, who recognized this entertainment value, that you can cover crime with scandal. You can make autocracy as entertainment. People will call you a, quote, dirty trickster. That's the phrase they always use for Stone, instead of a hardened career criminal operative for a political party. He's a company man. Point. And like that, people are just so, And I think it's like as media got more and more elitist, and the type of people who are in the media were always these sort of like respectable types with Ivy League degrees who, you know, rarely would kind of like get down in the dirt and challenge anybody. You know, we're not really attached to reality themselves. Like they just lived for the entertainment value. You know, they're binge watching the news instead of covering it. And so when somebody like Stone comes along, they fall for the whole shtick. They think, oh, let's have him on the air. He'll get us clicks. Oh, let's cover him. He's so wacky. And they don't realize he's a, you know, seasoned, sophisticated operative and a very intelligent guy. And I'm not complimenting him. I'm just saying you should all be very wary of him because he's very good at what he does, even though he sounds deranged. That's part of the conceit.
Such an important distinction. And it makes me think that the same could be said about Joseph Goebbels. Dirty trickster. He's a dirty trickster, tussle his hair. And
well, they said it about Hitler. They were like, oh, Hitler, he's so ridiculous. Or look at Hitler's Bavarian winter home. I mean, those were real articles put out in places like the New York Times. And it's places like the New York Times that, you know, not only don't take people like Roger Stone seriously, or they pretend not to, but, you know, they have the hookup with him. Someone like Maggie Haberman, longtime family friend of Roger Stone. Roger Stone's out wishing her kids happy birthday on Twitter. I mean, if Roger Stone knew when my kids' birthdays were, I'd be like, what has gone wrong with my life? Like, what kind of person am I and what have I done? But in their world, to have someone who's hooked up to multiple mafias, sex cults, child trafficking operations, treason, they're like, yeah, you know, that's cool, that's normal. They were the same way with Jeffrey Epstein. They have this absolutely warped view of the world. I'm not sure if they're even self-aware enough to know that most Americans kind of look at this and are appalled. And this doesn't just mean, you know, I'm not just talking about like liberals or people who don't like Trump, like everyone, like the QAnon crowd, they're looking at a lot of these guys like, whoa, you know, why are you whitewashing this? Why are you mainstreaming clearly, you know, abhorrent behavior? So I don't know. I wish, you know, my degree is in anthropology. My PhD is in anthropology. And I would love if someone did like an anthropological study of elite media, of like the Times and the Post and who gets in there and the corporate culture, because it is a distinct culture, you know, and I'm not saying like everyone in it is evil or bad or anything like that. But I think people operate within a framework that's maybe not representative of the typical American experience to the degree that there is one.
I have a lot of thoughts about that. And when I get talking to you or mostly listening to you, I know I can go off on a million tangents and then they throw out all of the important questions that I have. So I want to just ask you a few of those. We'll come back to that maybe at some point. I think I'd love to talk with you for hours, Andrea too, and on about anything, but about just media criticism in general. But real quick, when are your kids' birthdays so I can let Roger know?
Yeah, that information's not getting out.
You mentioned though, I wanted to ask you about if you're familiar. Lin Wood. Do you know who Lin Wood is? This one of Trump's new campaign lawyers.
Now I do. Yeah, because I saw the video of him wilding out in Georgia, I believe.
So I did a semi-smart thing last night by enlightening my audience with just a little bit of information, which I usually, you know, I'm just a hack and I'm just taking things from other sources. But last night I looked up Lin Wood, this guy. And this is the guy, in case people don't know, who was at this rally yesterday, basically saying, where are the two Republican senators? I want to talk to you about the Georgia runoff. It's so important. Don't re-vote in the runoff. He's telling Republicans, don't vote. He's saying they stole the election. He said Trump won. He got 80 million votes. He won California. It's all rigged. All this. That guy, I looked up to him. He is one of these lawyers that you're talking about. He's been a celebrity. He's defended John Bonet's parents. He defended Kyle Rittenhouse. He defended the Covington Catholic kid. His history is one of these, you know, and obviously is a personal injury lawyer by practice. My question to you, Sarah, is Rudy Giuliani, Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, now Jenna Ellis, Lin Wood, Sidney Powell, these types of lawyers, Michael Cohen, you can name a few more, I'm sure. How would you describe them? Because the way I describe them is they could care less about their client. What they care about is the profile of the case. They jump on board. Came out today that Lin Wood donated to Democrats. Like, he has no principles. He sees his only case is to make money off of it. That's the truth of all these lawyers. Do you think Rudy Giuliani likes Trump? Maybe, but mostly, or Roger Stone likes him. No, I don't think anybody likes Trump. I think you see something and they're like a bee to honey. They gravitate towards it so they can make the money. What is your thoughts on their legal team and those types of people?
Yeah, I mean, I think Dershowitz is another example of this. And I think that, a lot of the nexus of this, I mean, it sounds a little weird, but goes to the O.J. Simpson trial, and that, which of course, Dershowitz was on that legal team, and this idea of the celebrity lawyer, and the lawyer becoming like a figure in their own right. And, there were obviously people before this. Roy Cohn was probably the original celebrity lawyer, or sometimes people didn't even know he was a lawyer. He was just this sort of guy about town who was always, getting in trouble and hooking up with terrible people. And I think for each of them, it's a different case. I think, Trump is a typical paranoid, aspiring autocrat who is also a career criminal. And people like that are very insular. They only stick to family and to people they've known for decades. So in his case, that's someone like Giuliani. They go back 30 years. Same with Stone, same with Manafort. That's his inner circle, his inner sanctum. And Trump has always known, and he learned this from his father as well, to let the lawyers handle the complicated stuff. Like, Trump is the showman and the lawyers go out and handle the dirty details. But he also knows to pick a flamboyant lawyer, to pick a lawyer who understands media culture and who understands tabloid culture and who can distract the court of public opinion and dominate that. Even if they don't think they're going to get a win in real court, it's part of a bigger process of building a narrative. And then when you insert that into politics, especially with the Republican Party, that narrative is designed to confuse people. It's designed for the next court case. What they're doing right now is trying to say the entire election was illegitimate, which of course is very ironic given that the 2016 election was likely the actual illegitimate election. And of course, this time around, they tried, and we know they tried. Like, they literally dismantled the Postal Service equipment. They did voter suppression tactics. My guess is that a lot of these allegations about voting machine equipment is projection. There's been a history of these machines being hackable, of Karl Rove getting involved in various past elections. So I think what they maybe tried to do didn't work, and they're on plan B, which was legal cases. That has not worked. So they're now on plan C, which is like getting these flamboyant lawyers out, and also getting people like Michael Flynn pardoned and out on a national stage to rile everybody up and just straight out say, we're done with the Constitution. We're done with the transition. We are having a coup. And, this is very dangerous stuff, because it's now been, today's the anniversary. It's been 1 month since the election, and we don't have a concession, and we don't have a sense of stability at all about what the next couple of months will hold. And so I think a couple of weeks ago, people felt more confident that, Biden's going to come in. Like, obviously Trump's going to be a shithead, but Biden will make it in. And now I think they're looking at Flynn and all this other stuff and are thinking, oh God, like, if Biden gets in, what's going to happen in the interim? It's going to be very scary.
You're going to hear me say shithead more. I haven't heard shithead in a little while. I haven't heard it in a little while.
I'm reverting back. It's like this year 2020 destroyed my brain and made me longing for the 90s.
When you talk about the corruption or the attempted corruption election, first of all, it's such an important point that you make. The 2016 likely was all kinds of problematic. It was an illegitimate election, in my view, that was never properly investigated. And I mean, and that's just, I have to say, in my view, because there wasn't an audit, there wasn't an investigation, a real one. So I can't say definitively what happened. I just have very well-grounded suspicions. I'll just put it that way. But and now when you look at what's happening right now, though, Sarah, I don't know how we examine this, but as a way to get to the Georgia runoff, which you and Andrea have been doing, have been talking a lot about on Gaslit Nation, as well as actually taking action and letter writing campaign, which I want to talk about. But these lawyers and what Trump is trying to do right now, it's destroying democracy, but I think it's hurting them. It's hurting the Republican Party. They're literally saying, don't vote in this runoff election because the elections are scam. And I understand that it's disenfranchising a whole bunch of Republicans. I understand that it's destroying the country and democracy and the social fabric of our democracy. But I think they're going to lose. It's a terrible game to tell people not to vote because they don't have another mechanism, at least right now. They failed in setting up their autocracy. How does this affect? Well, first of all, let me just get to the main question. How important is the Georgia runoff election? How do you argue with that?
It's critical. It's an absolute like make or break it election because it determines the balance of power in the Senate. And if both Ossoff and Warnock win, then Kamala Harris becomes the tiebreaker in the Senate, and the Democrats have the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and therefore can undo a great deal of the damage that the Trump administration has done. And what they should be doing is putting in very progressive policies on existential crises like climate change, income inequality. You know, there are all sorts of things that would normally never get passed. They can do that. And these are not sort of like fun little, you know, dreams of mine. These are things that our country needs to survive. And so it needs to get done. And if Mitch McConnell's Senate is blocking a lot of these things, which of course it will probably even block Biden's confirmation picks, we'll be in enormous trouble. You know, with Georgia, it is very interesting that they're telling people don't vote, you know, they're telling people don't vote for the Republicans. In my view, it's because of this bigger narrative build. I think they have something planned. And I think this is their attempt to create integrity, like a veneer of integrity. They're trying to say the whole thing is so corrupt that we don't even want you voting for our candidates, our picks, our party, because the whole thing is broken. And then later on, when people say you're playing partisan games, you're just trying to rig things for Trump, they'll be like, no, we were so pure in motive that we even told people not to vote, you know? And it's like, I don't think anyone who falls for this is like an absolute moron, because, you know, they've spent years and years and years, decades really, doing the opposite, you know, openly trying to rig things, to cheat things. Trump spent a whole summer, you know, going after the post office, having Louis DeJoy do his dirty work. Like, it's a very unconvincing display of integrity, but I think that maybe his base may buy into it, his more fanatical base. And I think when you simultaneously have that with people like Michael Flynn, you know, riling people up, trying to get them ready for Civil War II, like they're looking at things on a bigger scale, that I think the kind of horse race politic coverage that we see on cable news or from like Nate Silver or people like that, it doesn't encapsulate it. It's like a political culture question, not a traditional politics numbers question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a political culture question, but the political culture in the conservative movement, which is also overlaps with the QAnon movement, which overlaps with the white supremacist movement, which all could be encompassed by calling it Trumpism, is interesting, Sarah, because if you look at Donald Trump, the man, and you could say this about all these lawyers we've been talking about, they don't give a fuck about the movement. Mm-hmm. They don't care about the Republican Party specifically, because if they did, they would concede and put everything they had into keeping the Senate so they could do everything they could to stop Joe Biden. If you want the Republican movement, the conservative movement to succeed at least the way it is, you maintain the Senate. You concede the election. You say, go vote, but they don't care. They don't care about tomorrow. They only care about making money for themselves. They could care less about America, democracy, and they certainly don't give a shit about the Republican Party, is my assertion without a question, but I feel like you'll be able to pick up that ball.
I think that's definitely true of the big faction of it, the faction that's backing Trump. You know, people like Roger Stone or Giuliani, who are engaged in transnational organized crime. So their income flow is, you know, immersed in all these other things. I think someone like Mitch McConnell and this more bureaucratic win, he is concerned. He wants to retain the Senate. I think they see this as like a two-pronged strategy. I mean, one of the things they're doing in Georgia is focusing on the election machine. And I think it's possible that McConnell wants to come out and say, oh yeah, the machines are rigged. And, you know, this argument drives me crazy. And, you know, I highly recommend people follow Jenny Cohn on Twitter, who's like the lone voice in the woods, who actually knows the histories and backgrounds of the big rival voting machine companies, which ones have histories of corruption. The Republicans have basically inverted the narrative and are saying that the company that is less corrupt is actually the more corrupt one. The one that has a history of possibly falsifying votes is the one that they want everyone to use, because it will then falsify their votes. So it's very complicated, but they're just
really is very complicated, which is why I interviewed Jenny Cohn. I interviewed Jenny Cohn last year, and it's a very interesting woman, and absolutely people should. But I remember interviewing her and Sarah being like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
it's
there
really
needs to be
complicated.
like vote rigging for dummies version of the
Yeah.
things that she posts, because a lot of times I'm like, okay, you gotta like slow
At
down,
Jenny Cohn
get this
one.
broken down and
Exactly.
into pieces. But the great thing with her work is that she's been tracking it for so long, and tracking it before all of this stuff started this new narrative, that she can actually debunk it, and it holds up on its own, because it's not a reactive statement to an ongoing conflict. It's just literally the history of the companies and what they've tried to do. But yeah, I mean, I do think they want to hold on to the Senate. And the question is, do they want to hold on to it by rigging? Do they want to hold on to it by actual turnout and an actual election? Or do they want to hold on to it by just saying, well, this whole thing is moot. Like the whole election is a mess. We just have to throw everything out and stick with the 2 Republican senators that we have. I mean, anything goes. Like that's the very frustrating thing about this time, is that there's nothing that's truly off the table, no matter how deranged it sounds. Like we have a ongoing attempted coup, and they're just throwing everything out there and they're seeing what sticks. And thankfully a lot of the things that they throw out has not worked, but the approaches that they're using are getting more and more extreme. We're now at the let's have military violence, let's have a paramilitary army led by Michael Flynn and his QAnon acolytes, taking over the government.
Sarah's talking about Michael Flynn basically calling for martial law. I mean, this is,
and he's like the conspiracy lead guy. He's he and his son created Pizzagate, and he's very good at this. He's the locker up guy. He's like that. Andrea was calling him like the hype man of Trump conspiracies.
He's the guy the Obama administration fired him, and then one of the only things Obama said to Trump on the day they met in the White House on inauguration day, right, was listen, Michael Flynn, bad news, gotta know it. And then Trump's like, thanks, appreciate the advice, I'll definitely promote him then. I mean,
yeah, exactly. And then Elijah Cummings too, he wrote a whole letter to Michael Pence basically saying Michael Flynn is a foreign asset. I mean
I didn't know that.
Flynn, oh yeah, it's dated in December of 2016, where he was basically no matter what you do not hire Michael Flynn. And here are some of the shady reasons why he should be nowhere near classified intelligence and whatnot. So Pence cannot claim he was not warned. And back when Flynn was actually being held accountable for, well, not even for his crimes, for one crime, for lying to the FBI, they decided to overlook him trying to illegally sell nukes to the Saudis, being a unregistered foreign agent for Russia, an unregistered foreign agent for Turkey, trying to kidnap a Turkish cleric who was living in Pennsylvania. I mean, there's so many crimes. He's like a crime machine, and he's out on the loose. And I mean, ever since that happened, that's one of the reasons I lost faith in the Mueller probe, is because they did indict him, and then they just were like, yeah, he cooperated. Let's let him run around. He came to my city. He came to St. Louis, immediately hooked up with a freak show conference hosted by Gateway Pundit, where they were just unleashing a dazzling array of wild conspiracy theories and violent plans. And this is while he was supposed to be cooperating with the Mueller probe. And I'm like, maybe a gag order would be a good idea here for him, for Roger Stone, because words have consequences. Pizzagate taught us that. Someone actually went to that pizza parlor and wanted to shoot it up. So, you got to kind of...
People always use that as the most extreme example, but I think we all need to punch up the less sexy examples about words have consequences. The fact that so many Americans are now buying into the Tom Hanks drinks baby's blood. I mean, that kind of stuff, those kind of consequences. We've lost so many of our friends, neighbors, and family members down the rabbit hole of crazy conspiracy. They might not take a gun and go and try to save the kids from a pizza shop, but they're definitely lost. They're gone.
Just the reaction to the pandemic, which I think, people are terrified, and I completely understand that.
Sure.
And I understand the wariness about vaccines, because our government does have a history of doing corrupt medical things to its own citizens, especially to Black citizens. You could look at, Tuskegee and things like that. But, what I was going to say is that there's basic things like wearing masks, that is just preventing germs from coming out. That is a very kind of, it's interesting to me that that's a thing that the conspiracy theorists have clung to as this is a symbol of oppression. It's literally just a mask. It's helping you get around. It's helping you preserve your freedom. But it's if that is going to be a symbol, then getting people to take a vaccine, which you really do have to have some kind of trust in the people giving it to you, is going to be very difficult. And it's one of the things I've been most concerned about in terms of like who is going to be the next president, Biden or Trump. And when Biden won, I was like, okay, that's a relief, because at least I know his team will try to roll out the vaccine in a responsible way. But what I hope they understand is just the level of paranoia that's out there. And it's not just hostile paranoia, partisan paranoia. It is genuine fear. It is people who are truly scared that the government is going to put a chip in them or hurt them in some way. And I'm not worried about that per se, but I am worried about, like, has this been tested well? Like, Trump was in charge while all this research was going on.
Well,
like,
Bush, Obama,
are these companies rushing it? Like, those are legit questions.
All the ex-presidents are going to get the vaccine. That'll convince.
That's just going to make everyone more paranoid.
Probably, right.
Because those three, I don't know. I mean, they'll just pick one and be like, do we trust George Bush? George Bush, who led us into war on false pretenses? Like, I feel like somebody was saying they need to find like the most trusted American and have them take the vaccine. It's like, who is it? And I think consensus is it's Dolly Parton, which is probably true. It's
that's
Dolly
awesome.
Parton may need to save America.
Oh my God, I can think of a few others, but what if George W. Bush got the vaccine, and to bring credibility, he had Dick Cheney give it to him? Do you think that would make a difference?
Just picturing, I'm just thinking of Dick Cheney shooting his friend in the face and the friend apologizing for being shot in the face.
Never forget, ladies and gentlemen, never forget. So getting back though to the Georgia runoff, which is so important. If I were producing Gaslit Nation, I would want to hear you guys talk for an hour or 10 just about the fundamental definition of corruption, because it's one of those things where I thought Americans generally agree that we might not call it the same thing, but we don't like it when people do this or that in business and government. We don't like that. And you might call it corruption. You might call it something else, a shady deal, a conflict of interest. But I'd love to hear you guys define corruption, because I think one thing that's fascinating with the Georgia runoff is that both of these senators, both of them, have been accused of some pretty, there's a lot of evidence to it, insider trading related to what they knew about the pandemic and stocks that they bought or sold or shorted. That, to me, it's not Republican, it's not conservative. That's bad.
Yes.
That's illegal, obviously, for obvious reasons, and it's corruption. It's one thing if you work at a company and you give your cousin or your friend an insider tip. That's terrible. But if you have intelligence or information because you're a United States senator and then you make a trade on that, what's that called? How do you talk about how important is it the fact that both of these Republican senators have been accused of insider trading based on information that they knew about COVID?
Yeah, it's disgusting. And it's emblematic of a wider problem in this administration where you saw the executive branch doing the same thing. People like Kushner, for example, profited off this. There's even a new article about that yesterday, but we knew about it going all the way back in March. And so, yeah, this should be highlighted for Georgia. And there's this tendency to not look at white collar crime, which is what this is, as violent crime, but it absolutely is violent crime. That's why they call it blood money. And, Trump, the Republicans, they've been surrounded by people who have operated in this world for so long and have never been held accountable that people think, oh, well, it can't really be that big a deal, or that's just the way American life works, or that's just the way American politics has to be. And it cannot be this way. It is absolutely unsustainable. And, we should know that. And when they're literally profiting off of mass death, which is what those two senators did, like that should be an enormous issue. And people are so afraid to confront it. I'm not quite sure why, but every time I hear about like, we need unity, I always want to know like with who, because there will never be unity with, me and anyone of conscience, with those two, with people who profited off this pandemic, with, people who were guards at the child concentration camps. Like there's a difference between just your average person, whoever, who like voted for Trump, like someone who has little power, little influence, whatever. They're just like someone living in your town. And these monstrous, incredibly powerful and influential people who made decisions that affected all of our lives and our deaths.
You got anything on this one? General John Kelly was first Department of Homeland Security before he became Trump's chief of staff, before he threw him under the bus, but anonymously, of course. And then in the private sector, he went to a job. Didn't he take a job working in one of the facilities about something to
Private
do with
prisons, yeah.
child separation? Like he separated children. He was part of that policy, and now he is profiting from that policy. I think I have that right. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But
No,
still,
you're
that's one
right.
of those. Talk about
He
your
went to
content.
work on, in the private prison complex, and he made money off of that. They're all making money off of inflicting torture, pain, suffering, illness, and death on American citizens who they are supposed to protect. And even
And you
if
think
they're
that's
not
bad?
in the government, yes, and I think that's bad. And I think it's worthy of note. I mean, that's the thing, is like people think they're being very sophisticated, like they're so cynical, like, oh, well, what do you expect? They're Republicans, or they're corporate people, or they're capitalists. It's like, I expect that you don't fuck us over, and that if you do, someone will come and hold you accountable. And that, yes, I'm going to call you out. And yes, I want everyone to call you out. I want all our senators and all our representatives to treat this like it's a really big deal, and not give little fist bumps, little handshakes, and talk about unity and talk about moving along and reaching across the aisle. If you're going to reach across the aisle to either of those two Georgia Republican senators, it should be just slap them across their face. Like, that's the only kind of interaction that the person like that, a person who literally profits off of the death of their own constituency, deserves. And and people would think, oh my God, that sounds so harsh. But really, who's the harsh one? Like me calling this out, or them for profiting off of death? It's so blatant. It should never be overlooked. It should never just be blown off as normal.
I'm smiling at you, and I'm sorry because the words that you're saying are horrible, but the word about what you're saying are horrible. But the way that you say them and the passion and intensity is why I love you, and why I love talking to you and listening to you and listening to your podcast with Andrew at Gaslit Nation. It makes me smile to hear those words linked together and said the way that you say them with so much humanity. And I think that's obviously what we've lost a lot of, and we can have a debate and discussion and argument about what humanity means, what it means to be not an American, but a human being, humanity. Okay, now you got me worked up. Let me go back, though, to this idea of a Trump Crimes Commission, or whatever you want to call it. There's a discussion happening in America right now. What do we do? What should the Biden administration do? Should we look backward and prosecute crimes, or do we move forward in the name of unity? I hope that there's a Trump Crimes Commission, obviously, and I hope that someone like you is called in to testify. Journalists who have been documenting all of these things, people like, I think, Amy Suskind, people like who've documented, like, there's such a flood of stuff. Most of us can't keep track of it. You have kept track of it. You have a running list, and it seems like you can just tap into your own brain without any notes, which is a huge talent to go into your own internal hard drive. You can discuss all of these things that so many of us have forgotten them. So what is your take on the divisiveness of a Trump's crime commission, and how it should look if we do have something resembling one?
Yeah, I'd be happy to work on something like that. And we absolutely need one. This problem, the amount of crimes that they've committed is so vast that I do think they need some sort of new department or commission or massive investigation. And the thing to remember is that as this is happening, Biden has to handle coronavirus, and he has to handle giving people the vaccine, which does require cultivating an environment of trust and making sure that people
and giving people money.
And giving people money, and preventing mass evictions, and preventing this giant humanitarian crisis from getting even worse. So he has a lot on his plate. So I think it's wise if it's moved away from Biden as an individual and onto a broader commission. And then you get into, well, how did Trump come into office? Are we going to leave that part of the story out? That's what Pelosi tried to do during impeachment. She would not impeach for all of these very obvious crimes, the ones laid out in the Mueller report, like obstruction of justice, because all of those crimes link back to the Russian mafia and institutional failure, the failure of the FBI, of previous administrations, of our entire government to stop infiltration of our institutions by organized crime. We need to have that all aired out. I've written a book about it. Others have too. Craig Unger has done quite a bit of work on this. Many of us, we know what happened. It's not speculative. Like, we have the financial records, we have confessions from the criminals. They were just never held accountable, not by Pelosi, not by Mueller, not by anyone. A lot of that stuff is controversial. That's why the Republicans get so worried about it, because it opens up this whole window, not just into connections with the Kremlin and Russia, but to dirty deals with Israel, with Turkey, with MBS in Saudi Arabia, all kinds of stuff. So my advice would be, start with the ones that are basic and affect everyone. Say, for example, how did they handle the coronavirus, crisis? We saw them profiting off of mass death. We saw them blocking PPE from states that needed it, shaking down governors, hiding information, lying to the public.
Sorry to interrupt.
So,
you have to go back. Sorry to interrupt. You have to go back and say, what coronavirus? How did they handle it? They started with, we don't see a problem.
Denying it.
Trump, I mean, there were people working in the government that absolutely, at CDC and everywhere else that were terrified of this, including people that are, we don't love necessarily. He didn't listen. So you have to start with him denying
the
it.
CDC, they gutted it. John Bolton was involved in that. I was
and
like,
the evidence there in stupid Bob Woodward's book.
Yes.
He knew it. He said he knew how bad it was. Privately and publicly, he lied. There's your evidence about denial. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think you got to start with his denial of it.
You start with that, or even just the gutting of the CDC, the fact that there was a coronavirus preparation handbook that they just threw out the window, because it's a nonpartisan issue. I mean, it's disproportionately affected Black and Native American communities, but we're all dealing with the effects of this virus, whether on a health scale or our economy, our schools. It's affected everybody's lives. It is a crime against humanity, and the way it's been carried out, a lot of attorneys have said it qualifies as basically negligent homicide or homicide by negligence. Yep. So I would start with that. And then the other one is the abuse of migrant families on the border, which is so horrific. It is a crime against humanity. It's the kind of thing where you need like a Nuremberg trial for, and there are concrete examples of it. And then last night it was revealed that, the Trump administration knew where these parents and children were the whole time and just separated them to torture them, just for pure cruelty. So I would go after that as well, because first of all, I think that absolutely, you need to establish legal precedent that this is a crime against humanity, so that no new Trump that comes in, say in 2024, or possibly the old Trump reemerges, can ever do this again and get away with it. Like, I was horrified when they didn't impeach over this. So I'd start with those two and then open it up to the broader context, which goes back decades and is an espionage plot, is a, foreign policy trade-off plot, is very complex, is a little, you saw shades of it during the impeachment hearings, but they mostly tried to confine that to a specific incident in 2019 involving the president of Ukraine. But it goes back into illicit dealings between oligarchs and plutocrats and a lot of shady international actors, things like 2 former FBI heads going on to work as lobbyists for the Russian mafia. I mean, all of that calls into question what's been going on in the US government with our sovereignty, with our national security for the past, basically 2.5 decades. That's a story they do not want told. I can tell you that firsthand, because everyone keeps trying to block my book from being discussed, especially the Jeffrey Epstein parts. But it needs to be told. The American people deserve to know the truth, and that includes the people who voted for Trump. They deserve the truth as much as everyone else. And I think, honestly, they're very interested in this. This is the thing that everyone is interested in, is elite criminal impunity and massive corruption in government. We all agree it's there. It's just a matter of who we blame for it. And I think there's a lot of blame to go around, and it all needs to get aired out, or we're just going to make the same mistakes again and again.
All right. My final question to you is a bit of speculation, but you and Andrea on Gaslit Nation have been talking about this. Obviously, you've been tweeting about it. It is, and this is, I guess, the scary part of our conversation, or the scariest part right now, is the remaining time that Trump is in office. And obviously, there's been speculation for all 4 years with, if he lost, what damage would he do after he lost during the lame duck period? And we've seen a lot of it. You guys have been talking, obviously, about a lot of it. That one of the worst things is they're bringing back the execution for the final 20 days. They're just going to kill a whole bunch of people in the name of the state, which is something that most developed countries haven't done for a very long time, and ours hasn't done for 17 years. But Bill Barr and Donald Trump love the death penalty, and so they're going to do that. Also, we're seeing potential, a conflict with Iran, and you guys had a great discussion about that. And my wife is pretty concerned he's going to nuke us all before he is on his way out. And so, what are your main concerns with the time remaining? Obviously, this is mostly speculation, but he's already made certain moves. What are your biggest concerns? Scare me.
I mean, I am this is the most worried I've been since he's taken office, in part because I cannot predict what he's going to do. Like I said before, they're attempting a coup and trying lots of things, in that direction. A lot of them aren't working. And so the tactics they're trying become more and more severe. And then there are other things going on, like they're trying to make money. They're trying to forge illicit international deals that can continue no matter who is the president next. And then I look at something like war in Iran, and I'm like, okay, you've got a whole bunch of guys in this administration whose lifelong dream has been war in Iran. People like Pompeo or people outside the administration that are just still involved in it, like Flynn, people like Kushner, people like Netanyahu. They all have wanted this. So they maybe just be trying to pursue that in its own right. Or they want a war that then either Iran could actually retaliate against us, which they may because of not only this, but the assassination of Soleimani back in January. And then we have a national emergency, or, and I hate to even suggest this, but I don't put anything past Trump. They could say we were attacked by Iran, say a cyber attack or something like that, and call a national emergency. I mean, Trump will invent anything for a national emergency, and that's not me speculating. He's done it before.
No, there's no
he
bottom.
said, there was a migrant horde back in late 2018 that then he used to justify a government shutdown. And I felt like that was kind of a prelude
military to the border.
Future action. Yes. I mean, he really calls this out. Yet the coronavirus, though, that's just fine. That'll just go away. That's not a national emergency. And so, we have invented catastrophes and then him ignoring real catastrophes, which is a terrible way to live. But that's going on. And then there's weird stuff Barr is doing. On one hand, he's saying now that Trump's allegations of election fraud are, don't hold up. But then he's also launching these sort of proto show trial investigations into government servants. As you said, he wants to bring back firing squads. I don't feel like he makes those moves randomly. He's a deliberate person. He's somebody who really came in ready to roll out the Mueller report, cover up all this kind of stuff. He's patient, he's considered, and he's a longtime GOP crime cleanup guy. He's been that guy since Iran-Contra, so it's not like he's new at this. And so I don't know what he's doing, though. I genuinely don't. And the fact that
we actually do know what he's doing. Well, first of all, I want to get you on the record. Where are you on firing squad?
Against.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we're clear on that and keep somebody confused.
Yes.
But no, what he is doing, I realize, and you kind of mentioned it, as you went through that litany of things that you're concerned about, we don't have to speculate. Yesterday and every day since the election and before and yesterday, he gave a 45-minute Facebook video where he whined like a small baby about the election. Also yesterday and this week has been the worst time of the pandemic. Thousands of Americans dying every day. Well, every minute someone's dying or so, every few minutes or so, if you break it down. We learned 400,000 Americans may have died. In a normal Republican, Democrat, any administration, this would be all we would be hearing about all day. The policies are questionable in terms of how they can be enforced. How will people follow? How they work? But what we would do is we would hear from our leaders every day. There would be an important news conference. This is how many people we've lost. Let's remember them. Start there. Then here are the policies that we think are work. And it would be every day. This man and everybody around him is whining about the election, which was a month ago, while Americans are dying. That's where the damage is, I think, being done every day. We don't need to speculate. It's happening right now. End of my commentary on that, I guess.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And it's beyond horrifying. And the fact that people have sort of forced themselves to like acclimatize to this ongoing horror just to survive, just so that we could get through all these daily actions we're forced to pursue. Our kids still have to go to school. We still have to go to work. We still have to struggle to hang on. And I feel like there's just such collective trauma. There's such built up grief, and there's no outlet for it. And so I think they do provide, I mean, it's not exactly a distraction because the things they're doing are meaningful, and they're going to determine the future of how this virus is handled, which is another thing that scares me very badly. But I worry so much about this country and the pent up pain and grief. And it's so hurtful when people either, deny the existence of the disease or don't express empathy for those who have it, or even for, like, I hate seeing this when somebody denies it and then they get it and then they die, and people look at their social media and they post it online and they're like, ha ha, that's what you get. So funny. It's like, oh my God, like, yes, of course that person should have listened to medical advice, but like, what is wrong with you? Like, that person has a family, they have people who love them. They're a human being. I'm sorry. I get upset. This whole thing is so upsetting.
I
and I just wish that we had baseline empathy and concern for anyone who suffered through this, because even if that person, said terrible things or recorded them online or whatever, they have somebody who loves them. They have people in their life who loves them, dependents probably. It's a tragedy for everyone. And like the fact that we've lost that, it's like we've lost something in ourselves. And that worries me basically beyond anything else, because it contributes to everything to come.
Let me just say this in the end. One of the best things about you and your work is that your humanity and empathy comes right through. You're a fierce journalist and commentator. You're as tough as anybody about injustice, but you're also as sensitive and as thoughtful as any human being. And when someone like you personifies that humanity and empathy, and Andrea too, on your podcast and in a conversation like mine, that is so important, because you're representing what we don't want to lose, and people look up to you and care about what you're saying and how you're saying that. So as long as you never lose that, I will not lose that. I will have faith in humanity, because there are millions of Americans, I think, like us, that still have that humanity and care about people who have been misled.
Mm-hmm.
And I
hope you're right. I mean, I think you are right. And I think we have the chance, to rebuild this. It's just going to be a hard road, and it requires honesty, and it requires,
and I think you've got
humility, and compassion for people, just based on principle, not based on party or whatever, just based on do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And, that's it.
I feel bad that I stepped on that a little bit because I was trying to make a joke.
No.
I was trying to make
your joke. I could use a joke right now.
I was just going to be like, you're saying
you're weeping about coronavirus. So.
Well, you kept saying as long as, and I was trying to insert as long as people follow Christ, but I feel it's no longer. It's like,
you missed the moment there.
I really did. And I've offended all my Christian listeners as well. Sarah, so great talking to you. Thank you so much. By the way,
thanks for having
let me just say this: whatever works, follow Christ. Whatever works for you to find your humanity. I didn't mean to. I was just making a joke about religion. I'm sorry, everybody. Whatever.
We got very preachy at the end, so I think it's okay. I think everyone will understand.
Sarah, thank you very much. I appreciate it as always.
Thank you.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you watched all the way, subscribe to Stand Up Pete Dominick. Wherever you subscribe to podcasts, support me with a paid subscription on Patreon, patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Go to standupwithpete.com anytime. Thank you.